The snarling echoed through the moonlit alley, freezing my blood and stopping me dead in my tracks. I'd heard many sounds in my years living in Nashville, but nothing like this. A guttural, primordial noise that spoke to the deepest, most primal part of my brain. Run, hide, survive. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the cracked pavement, my heart thundering in my chest as I stared into the inky blackness ahead. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, and for a moment I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then I saw it, a pair of gleaming yellow eyes, filled with an intelligence and hunger that was anything but human. I'm Aaron, and this is how my normal life in Music City turned into a nightmare. A nightmare starring a creature I'd always believed was nothing more than a myth, a werewolf. And now, as I huddle in this dark corner, praying for sunrise, I'll recount the terrifying events that led me here. Maybe if I survive this night, someone will find this account and believe me. Maybe they'll be prepared for what stalks the streets of Nashville when the moon is full and the night is deep. It all started 3 nights ago. I was working late at the recording studio, trying to finish up a mix for an up-and-coming country star. The neon signs of Lower Broadway had long since dimmed, and the tourists had stumbled back to their hotels. Nashville was quiet, or as quiet as it ever gets. I left the studio around 2 a.m., my ears ringing from hours of playback. The streets were empty, save for a few late-night revelers and the occasional taxi. I decided to cut through an alley off 2nd Avenue, a shortcut I'd taken 100 times before. But this time was different. Halfway down the alley, I heard a sound that made me stop. It was a low, rumbling growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. My first thought was that it must be a stray dog, maybe injured or cornered. But as I peered into the darkness, I saw something that defied explanation. A massive shape loomed at the far end of the alley. It was vaguely canine, but far too large to be any dog I'd ever seen. Its shoulders easily reached my chest, and its muzzle was filled with teeth that gleamed in the dim light. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. Yellow, intelligent, and filled with an almost human malevolence. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I could hear my own ragged breathing, see the steam of the creature's breath in the cool night air. Then, with a snarl that seemed to shake the very ground, it lunged. I don't remember consciously deciding to run. One moment I was frozen in terror, the next I was sprinting back the way I'd come, my feet pounding the pavement as I burst out onto 2nd Avenue. I could hear it behind me, its claws scraping on concrete, its breathing harsh and hungry. I ran without direction, without thought. My only goal was to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. I darted across streets, narrowly avoiding the few cars still on the road. I knocked over trash cans, leapt over low fences, anything to try and slow my pursuer. But it was always right behind me. No matter how fast I ran, no matter what obstacles I put in its path, I could hear it getting closer. Its growls filled my ears, drowning out the sound of my own labored breathing and pounding heart. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw salvation. The glass doors of a 24-hour diner, light spilling out onto the sidewalk. With a final burst of speed, I threw myself at the doors, practically falling inside. The few patrons and the tired-looking waitress all turned to stare at me as I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. I must have looked insane, wild-eyed, covered in sweat, babbling about some monster chasing me. But when they looked out the windows, there was nothing there. No giant wolf creature, no signs of pursuit. Just the empty streets of Nashville in the early hours of the morning. The waitress helped me to a booth and brought me a glass of water. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been in my imagination? Some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? But I knew what I had seen. The memory of those yellow eyes, that slavering maw, was burned into my mind. Whatever it was, it had been real. And somehow I knew it wasn't finished with me. I spent the rest of that night in the diner, jumping at every sound, peering nervously out the windows. When dawn finally broke, I made my way home, looking over my shoulder every few steps. I tried to go about my day normally, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide those yellow eyes. Every distant dog bark made me flinch. I knew I should tell someone, but who would believe me? A 40-year-old man claiming to be chased by some kind of wolf monster? I'd be laughed out of town, or worse, locked up in some psychiatric ward. So I kept it to myself, hoping against hope that it had been some kind of one-time occurrence. But as night fell again, I could feel the fear creeping back in. I made sure to leave work early, to be safely home before darkness fully descended. But as I approached my apartment building, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the flickering light of a street lamp, was a massive paw print in a patch of soft earth. It was easily the size of my head, with clear impressions of razor-sharp claws at the tips of each toe. I hurried inside, locking and bolting my door behind me. But even as I huddled in my living room, lights blazing and TV on for company, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Whatever this creature was, it had my scent now, and it was hunting me. The second night passed in a haze of fear and sleeplessness. Every creak of the building, every distant siren made me jump. I alternated between pacing my apartment and huddling in corners, away from windows. By the time morning came, I was a wreck, exhausted, paranoid, and no closer to understanding what was happening to me. I called in sick to work, unable to face the thought of leaving my apartment. Instead, I spent the day researching, scouring the internet for any information that might help me understand what I was dealing with. At first, I felt ridiculous typing "Werewolf Sightings Nashville" into my search bar, but as I dug deeper, I found more than I'd bargained for. There were forums dedicated to werewolf lore, filled with debates about silver bullets and lunar cycles. But more disturbingly, there were also news reports, buried on local sites, never making it to major outlets, of strange animal attacks in and around Nashville over the past few months. The details were vague, but a pattern emerged. The attacks always happened at night, always around the full moon. Victims described a creature too large to be a normal wolf, too intelligent to be a simple animal. And always there were mentions of those terrifying yellow eyes. As I read account after account, my fear began to crystallize into something else: determination. If this creature was real, if it was hunting me, then I needed to find a way to fight back. I couldn't keep running forever. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I ordered silver jewelry online, hoping the old legends about werewolves and silver held some truth. I found an outdoor store that was still open and bought the biggest, sharpest knife they had. It wasn't much, but it was something. As night fell, I steeled myself for what was to come. I knew somehow that this would be the final confrontation. Either I would find a way to stop this creature, or it would be the end of me. I left my apartment just as the last rays of sunlight were fading from the sky. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the whole city was holding its breath. I made my way towards Centennial Park, reasoning that if I was going to face this thing, I'd rather do it away from crowded areas. The park was deserted, the usual joggers and dog walkers conspicuously absent. As I walked deeper into the grounds, the sounds of the city faded away, replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I found myself in a clearing, the full moon casting everything in a silvery glow. And there, at the edge of the trees, I saw it, the werewolf. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly for the first time, and the reality was far more terrifying than my memories. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. Its body was a twisted amalgamation of wolf and man, powerful, muscled limbs covered in thick, matted fur, hands that ended in razor-sharp claws. Its face was a nightmarish blend of human and canine features, with a protruding snout filled with gleaming fangs. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me, yellow, glowing in the darkness, and filled with an intelligence that was unmistakably human. This wasn't just some animal. There was a person in there, buried beneath the fur and fangs, and that person wanted me dead. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, see the steam of the creature's breath in the cool night air. Then, with a roar that seemed to shake the very ground, it charged. I had a split second to react. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as massive claws swept through the space where I'd been standing. I rolled to my feet, the knife clutched in my sweating hand, and faced the monster again. It was faster than anything its size had a right to be. It spun and lunged again, its jaws snapping shut inches from my face. I stumbled backwards, slashing wildly with the knife. I felt it connect, heard the creature's howl of pain, but it didn't slow down. We danced this deadly waltz through the clearing, the werewolf attacking relentlessly, me desperately trying to stay alive. I was covered in scratches and bruises, my clothes torn, but somehow, miraculously, I was still standing. But I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I was tiring, my reactions getting slower with each passing minute. The werewolf, on the other hand, seemed tireless, driven by a hunger and rage that knew no bounds. As I backed away from another lunge, I felt my foot catch on something. I went down hard, the knife flying from my grasp. I looked up to see the werewolf looming over me, triumph gleaming in those terrible yellow eyes. In that moment, as I stared death in the face, time seemed to slow. I saw the werewolf's muscles bunch, preparing for the final, killing lunge. I saw the moonlight glinting off its fangs, heard the low growl building in its chest. And then I saw something else, my silver chain, which had fallen out of my pocket during the fight. It lay on the ground just within reach, glowing softly in the moonlight. As the werewolf lunged, I grabbed the chain and swung it with all my might. It connected with the creature's face just as its jaws were about to close on my throat. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Where the silver touched, the werewolf's flesh seemed to burn and melt. It reared back with a howl of agony, clawing at its face. I scrambled to my feet, the chain clutched in my hand like a lifeline. The werewolf charged again, but this time I was ready. I lashed out with the chain, catching it across the chest. Again, the silver burned, leaving a smoking gash in the creature's fur. For the first time, I saw fear in those yellow eyes. It backed away, snarling in pain and rage. I pressed my advantage, swinging the chain in wide arcs, driving the monster back step by step. Finally, with a last, hate-filled growl, the werewolf turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness of the park. I stood there, gasping for breath, the silver chain dangling from my trembling hand, hardly daring to believe I had survived. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. I sank to my knees, my whole body shaking. I don't know how long I stayed there, trying to process the impossible reality of what I just experienced. Eventually, I made my way out of the park and back to the city streets. The familiar sights and sounds of Nashville felt surreal after what I'd just been through. How could the world just go on, unknowing, while monsters stalked the shadows? I've spent the days since then in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every shadow, flinching at every unexpected sound. I know the werewolf is still out there, nursing its wounds, planning its revenge. And I know that when the next full moon rises, I'll have to face it again. But I'm ready now. I know what I'm dealing with, and I know how to fight it. I've stocked up on silver, turned my apartment into a fortress, and I've started reaching out, cautiously, to others who might believe me, who might have faced similar horrors. Because I've realized something. If one werewolf exists, there must be others, and someone needs to stand against them to protect the innocent people who have no idea of the dangers lurking in the night. So that's my story. The tale of how I, Aaron, a simple music producer from Nashville, became a reluctant monster hunter. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing for certain. I'll never look at a full moon the same way again. And to anyone reading this, be careful out there. The night is dark and full of terrors, and not all of them are as familiar as we'd like to believe. Keep your eyes open, your silver close, and remember, sometimes the monsters from our nightmares are all too real.